everyone. It's nice to see you, albeit in this technological format. And for those of you who feel comfortable, look forward to seeing you in person later on this week as we try to make the most of it and try to come together as a community, as a congregational family for the holiday of Purim. Once again, we have another holiday on our calendar that is irregular, abnormal, challenging. We'll do the best we can, although on this occasion, we can be more hopeful, more optimistic that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that all of this can be managed so that we might yet come together soon with a more full holiday experience. One looks at the story of Purim, and one hears the Megillah, and one of those moments, those dramatic moments in the Megillah, is when you see the Baal Koreh, the one who's leading the Megillah, Rabbi Skaist often, take a large breath and then run through all the sons of Haman in that one breath. There's an interesting Gemara about the children of Haman. The Gemara in Gittin says, on Daf Nun Zayin, listen to this, that Haman's descendants learned in the yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Wild. You and I think of Bnei Brak, we see what it is today in modern Israel, but even more than that, inside the Haggadah, we say those words about Rabbi Akiva and his students having their Seder and learning Torah together. And Haman's descendants were studying Torah in yeshiva in Bnei Brak. It's incredible. The Megillah tells us that after Haman got the invitation to go to the Mishtat, to go to the party that Esther was hosting, it was him and Achashverosh and Esther. He was so excited. The Megillah says this in the pasuk, in the verse, that he goes home, he tells Zeresh, he tells all of his household, and it says, Rov Banav. Rov Banav. Those words in the Megillah, people who are picking at every single letter, every single word, as is our wont to do, says, just say that he tells his children, Banav. Why Rov Banav? And so, of course, there are different opinions. Some people say that he had 30 children. Some people say he had 70 children. Some people say he had 208 children. Rov, Resh is 200, and Vav is 6, and Bet Beis is 208 children. A lot of different opinions. But that whole drama of taking the breath and saying it all at once is because they were hung, they were killed, Haman's descendants are no more, they were gone, eradicated from the earth. So who survived? How did they get to Bnei Brak? How did they get to yeshiva? Why were they studying Torah? So some answers are that, of the 30, 10 were killed during the hostilities, 10 were hung as specified in the Megillah. Those were the 10 main sons. 10 of them were rendered destitute. The rest of the 70, according to that opinion, were financially bereft. The rest of the 208, they were economically isolated. After all, look at Haman's family. Look, he was an enemy of the people. Nobody wanted to be associated with him. Nobody wanted to do business with him or his family. So different opinions. Physically, they were alive, but financially, they were ruined. The Maharsha, the famous commentary on the Gemara, he's not having any of this. He says, the Megillah tells us, Haman had children, Haman's children were killed, and that's the end of them. So there has to be a better explanation another explanation. And we'll go through some of them. And again, these children were part of Haman's team. So if they were gone, physically, make sense because they were an important part of his plotting. He kept them, the Torah, the Megillah tells us that he kept them updated on what was going on. And he was so excited, his plan was coming to fruition by going to the party and being at that level with Achashverosh and Esther. But there's another issue. Besides understanding the basic story of the Megillah and how this can possibly shtim, how can this possibly be what the Gemara tells us? Besides that issue of how they survived and how they got to that point to be alive in Bnei Brak, maybe they were just poor, that's rejected by the Maharsha. There's another problem. And that is this past Shabbos was Parsha Zachar. We're told that we have to get rid of all of Amalek. If we have to get rid of all of Amalek, that's what Megillah is telling us. We got rid of all of Amalek. How could they have lived based on that commandment? Based on this requirement to get rid of the nation of Amalek. And we read in the Haftorah that Shaul didn't do his job. Now some want to say Shaul saw that there was going to be children who were learning in Bnei Brak, and that's why he didn't kill Agag, the king of Amalek at the time, and Shmuel had to do it. But we have a requirement to kill Amalek. So how can they be learning in Bnei Brak? Why were they allowed? They were admitted into the yeshiva. They were part of the leaders, the scholars of the Jewish people, being in Bnei Brak. Haman's descendants. Don't we have an obligation to get rid of all of Amalek? What happened to that requirement within the 613? You can take a step back just for a moment, just to share that one of the conundrums, the question that we're asking now. First, we asked the question about the Megillah tells us we got rid of Haman's children, and here they are studying in Bnei Brak. The second question is, even if they did somehow survive, how did we let them come into yeshiva, let alone not kill them based on the commandment? Just want to share, because I find it personally very helpful. My Rabbi, Rabbi Lichtenstein Zatzal, he said that he spent his life in the yeshiva, and he says, he always had a problem morally, ethically, with this commandment of getting rid of the nation of Amalek. And he said, how can this be part of our ethical system? And he said, he was never able to come up with the most satisfying answer until he realized that he needed to check his doubts, his question, for the following reason. His wife's grandfather was known as this great tzaddik, this great scholar, Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, the Grach, or the great-grandfather of his wife. And the story was told in the family that he was now a part of, that Reb Chaim Soloveitchik couldn't sleep at night. He just had this insomnia, night after night after night. And what was perplexing him? What was keeping him awake at night? Why couldn't he sleep restfully? And the answer was that as the rabbi in his town, Brisk, he was always concerned that there might be an orphan left at his doorstep. It happened, it has happened, and he couldn't fathom what could be or what would be. Perhaps there might be, he couldn't go to sleep because as the rabbi, he was concerned that maybe somebody would drop off an unwanted child, Rahman al-Islam, heaven forfend. And he married his great-granddaughter. He heard about this story. What he internalized was, if this great rabbi, this great righteous, this great tzaddik, this scholar, was so bothered by that, and I sleep just fine. In my town, being the leading scholar rabbi, he didn't say that, I'm saying that. So it must be that there's a lack of understanding on my part, whatever that might be. But if he wasn't bothered by this issue, I'm not on his level. I shouldn't be bothered by this. Now that might be helpful, might not be helpful. I found it meaningful for me. But we have this commandment of getting rid of the nation of Amalek. So why are they allowed in yeshiva in Bnei Brak? A lot of different approaches. Some people say that Haman's descendants lived. After all, it's only a communal responsibility if it's inside the land of Israel. But on the flip side, there is an individual responsibility if you encounter a member of the nation of Amalek anywhere in the world. So the question still persists. And it's codified and it's brought down as one of the 613. The Mechilta Chazal say that if they were to apply, and part of this commandment, if they were to try to convert and be a candidate for conversion, everybody's accepted, but not Amalek. There's an exception there. There are other exceptions, but Amalek is not accepted. After all, their ideology, their compass, their values are opposite of our own. Not only that, but they are forcefully trying to combat our value system and take down the world accordingly, as of course happened through our traversing the desert. And eventually it led to Haman. So the Mechilta says, a couple thousand years old, that has a teaching that we have to reject Amalek as a gift. So again, clearly they converted if they're studying in yeshiva in Bnei Brak. How is this allowed? Well, there's another opinion. Maimonides says, you know what? That Mechilta, we don't paskin that way. That is not an authoritative opinion. The Rambam says they can be Megayer, they can convert. Not only that, even if they don't convert, you can let them live if they accept the 7 Noahide laws, even in Israel, according to the most strict opinions. The Chazon Ish lived in the last 100 years. He explains this issue as saying that if there is no war, if we're not at odds, if there's no military competition, there's no combat whatsoever, then they can go ahead with a gerus, with a conversion. And so that's what happened. There was a time period between the story of Purim and the Gemara describing the individuals who descended from Haman. And they had gone through a conversion when there was no war. So that's one approach to this issue. So we'll just pause here for a moment and we'll get back to our questions. But there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin I want to share with you. And that is that there is a woman named Timnah. Timnah, she's in this genealogical passage within Bereshis. And the Gemara tells us that Timnah was a woman of royalty. She was a princess. And she came to Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov. This is the way the Gemara describes it. She came to our ancestors. And she wanted to be a part of our people. And she was rejected. Her sincerity, her character was questioned. She was rejected for admission. But do we know it? The Gemara tells us what happens. And we understand what happens based on the progression of Chumash and Tanakh. She ended up marrying the grandson of Esav. She said, the son of Esav, if I can marry the grandson of Yitzchak, if that's all I can do in terms of being a part of the family, that's what I'm going to do. She married Eliphaz, the son of Esav, and they had a child. That child's name was Amalek, the original Amalek. The Gemara tells us there might have been an issue with her desire to be part of the Jewish family. But our matriarchs and patriarchs should have embraced her and welcomed her anyway. And the punishment was that which they saw was they weren't able to impact it for the better, and it was instilled within Eliphaz, within Amalek, and Amalek became what he became, a thorn in the side of the Jewish people, culminating in the story of Purim. That's how we got here to this issue and this question. But again, what the matriarchs and patriarchs should have realized is that there was a goodness that could have been nurtured to lend itself to having descendants, learning Torah in Bnei Brak and Yeshiva. Rabbi Yosef Engel, one of the great scholars of the 19th century, leading scholars, says, look, with regards to our question of did they kill the children of Haman or not, and how he said that yes, just as the Maharsha says. Of course, they killed all the sons of Haman. Don't tell me there's 208. Don't tell me there were 70. He says, we know from the Megillah, they were all killed off. Those are the only 10 we know about. He says, but when it comes to Amalek and the nations of the world, we look at patrilineal descent. So that's how we explain this question. But we know Haman had daughters also. And the children that were studying in Bnei Brak were descendants of the daughters of Haman. And that's how we had descendants who were there in yeshiva. That's another approach to our question. One last opinion. The Rav Yashaber, Rabbi Joseph B. Soloveitchik, Zatzal, he says, Amalek is not a biological, genealogical phenomenon. It's not about a tree of a family, of a clan, of a nation. It's about opposing the values of Torah and trying to prey upon the weak and try to take away the morality of Torah. It's an ideology. It's not a nation. And Haman's offspring saw the utter destruction that Haman went through, saw the miraculous downfall, the spectacular elimination of Haman and his power overnight. And they said, we're not going to do that again. We're not going to subscribe to that. There's something else going on here in the world, and they investigated. Haman's descendants, his daughters, his grandchildren, or whatever approach you want to take, maybe it was the other sons, according to the other approaches, they saw whatever Haman was representing, we're not going to continue that. And they went on a different path. And you know what? That different path led to studying in yeshiva, in Bnei Brak, ancient Bnei Brak. There's a story, the chief rabbi of Lublin, Rabbi Meir Shapiro, and he was collecting for the school system. He was soliciting from one of the major philanthropists in town. And this major philanthropist said, Rabbi Shapiro, I appreciate what you're doing, but thank you, but no thank you. I'm not interested. Look at me. Look at my life. Look at my family. I have nothing to do with yeshiva. I have nothing to do with facilitating Torah education. Other projects come knock on my door, we'll have a discussion, but this is not for me. Rabbi Shapiro told him this story. He said, you might think that you have nothing to do with studying in yeshiva. It has nothing to do with you. But know this story. You are not in the category of Haman. You could have descendants studying in yeshiva without question, and you probably will. And he had this discussion with him. And indeed, Rabbi Shapiro collected his donation for the Yeshivas Chachmei Lublin, a storied institution, from this gvir, from this donor, this individual, talking about exactly this issue. And so there are so many lessons. Mostly, we survived for a reason. The Purim story, the miracle that happened for a reason. We have to never cross out anybody, cancel anybody, give up on anybody. We need to realize that in order for Torah to be ascendant, that we need to strive for progress. We need to make sure that the Purim story was not for naught. We didn't live just to live, but we lived to accomplish. We live to further Torah accordingly. And so it's important for us to realize. It's important for us to realize that as we go through the Megillah, as we read through the Megillah, as we listen to the Megillah being read, I realize this is our story, that we will persevere no matter how difficult things get, no matter how difficult matters are for us, that we will continue on. And certainly we realize that if Amalek's descendants can study in yeshiva, we can study in yeshiva. Yeshiva can be a powerful place. Studying and everybody, because it's about the Jewish people within the world. And so here at Zon, may it be Hashem's will that the Almighty blesses us with strength, with inspiration, to realize that every day is a gift. And that what Haman wanted to destroy couldn't destroy because it's too powerful. And that we now have the opportunity to tap into that power, to rejuvenate ourselves, to excite ourselves, to inspire ourselves in service of the Almighty. Thank you, Purim Sameach, wishing one and all a happy